8 Famous Engines by the Reverend W. Awdry, read and adapted by Joshua Boston. Percy takes the plunge. Sometimes Percy takes stone cars to the other end of the line. There, he meets engines from the other railway. One day, Henry wanted a rest in the shed, but Percy was talking to some tank engines. He was telling them all about the time he had braved bad weather to help Thomas. "It was raining hard," he said. "Water swirled underneath my boiler. I couldn't see where I was going, but I struggled on." "Oh, Percy, you are brave." "Well," said Percy modestly, "it wasn't anything really. Water's nothing to an engine with determination." "Tell us more, Percy," said the engines. "What are you engines doing here?" hissed Henry. "This shed is for Sir Topham Hatt's engines. Go away!" "Silly things," he snorted. The tank engines were pained, and they puffed away. "They're not silly!" Percy had been enjoying himself, and he was cross with Henry for sending them away. "They are silly, and so are you. Water's nothing to an engine with determination. Pah!" "Anyway," said cheeky Percy, "I'm not afraid of water. I like it." And he ran off to the harbor singing, "Once an engine attached to a train was afraid of a few drops of rain. It went into a tunnel, squeaked through its funnel, and never came out again." "Oh, no one ever lets me forget the time I wouldn't come out of the tunnel in case the rain spoiled my paint," huffed Henry. Percy arrived home feeling very pleased with himself. "Silly old Henry," he chuckled to himself. Thomas was looking at a board on the quay, and it read, "Danger." "We mustn't go past it," he said. "That's orders." "Why?" "Danger means falling down something," said Thomas. "I went past danger once and fell down a mine." "I can't see a mine," said Percy, looking beyond the board. He didn't know that the foundations of the quay had sunk. The rails now sloped downward into the sea. "Stupid board," said Percy. He made a plan. For days and days he tried to sidle past the board, but his driver stopped him every time. "No, you don't," he would say. At last, one day at the top station, Percy whispered to some freight cars in the yard, "Will you give me a bump when we get to the quay?" The freight cars were surprised. They had never been asked to bump an engine before. They giggled and chattered about it all the way down. "Whoa, Percy, whoa!" said the driver, and Percy checked obediently at a distant signal. "Driver doesn't know my plan?" he chuckled. On! Laughed the cars. Percy thought that they were helping. "I'll pretend to stop at the station, but the cars will push me past the board. Then I'll make them stop. I can do that whenever I like." If Percy hadn't been so conceited, he would never have been so silly. Every wise engine knows that you cannot trust freight cars. At last they reached the station, and Percy's brakes groaned. That was the signal for the cars. "Go on! Go on!" they yelled and surged forward together. They gave Percy a fearful bump and knocked his driver and fireman off the footplate. "Ow!" exclaimed Percy, sliding past the board. The day was misty, the rails were slippery, and his wheels wouldn't grip. Percy was frantic. "That's enough!" he hissed. But it was too late. Once on the slope, he tobogganed helplessly down, crashed through the buffers, and slithered into the sea. Percy was sunk. "You are a very disobedient engine." Percy knew that voice. He groaned. The foreman borrowed a small boat and rowed Sir Topham Hatt around. "Please, sir, get me out, sir. I'm truly sorry, sir. No, Percy, we can't do that till high tide. I hope it will teach you to obey orders and behave yourself. Yes, sir. Percy shivered miserably. He was cold. Fish were playing hide and seek through his wheels. The tide rose higher and higher. He was feeling his position more and more deeply every minute. It was dark when they brought floating cranes, cleared away the freight cars, and lifted Percy out. He was too cold and stiff to move by himself. So he was sent to the works on Henry's goods train the next day. Well, chuckled Henry. Did you like the water? No. I am surprised. You need more determination, Percy. Water's nothing to an engine with determination, you know. Perhaps you'll like it better next time. Percy is quite determined that there won't be a next time. Gordon goes foreign. Lots of people travel to the big station at the end of the line. Engines from the other railway sometimes pull their trains. These engines spend the night and go home next day. One day, Gordon was talking to one of these engines. When I was young and green, he said, I used to go to London. Do you know the place? The station there is called King's Cross. King's Cross? snorted the engine. London's Euston. Everybody knows that. Rubbish, retorted Duck. London's Paddington. I know. I worked there. They argued till they went to sleep. They argued when they woke up. They were still arguing when the other engine went away. Stupid thing, grunted Gordon. I've no patience. Stupid yourself, said Duck indignantly. London's Paddington. Paddington, where? Stop arguing, you two, James broke in. You make me tired. You're both agreed about something anyway. What's that? London's not Euston, laughed James. Now shut up. Gordon puffed away, still grumbling. I'm sure it's King's Cross, he thought. I'll go and prove it. But that was easier said than done. London lay beyond the big station. Gordon had to stop there. Another engine would then come by and take his train. If I didn't stop, he thought, I could go to London. One day he ran right to the station. Another time he tried to take off before the firemen could uncouple the coaches. He tried all sorts of tricks, but it was no good. His driver checked him every time. Oh dear, he thought sadly. I'll never get there. One day, Gordon pulled the express to the station as usual. His firemen then uncoupled the coaches, and then Gordon went on to his siding to wait until it was time to go home. The coaches waited and waited at the platform, but their engine didn't come. A porter ran across and spoke to Gordon's driver. There's an inspector waiting for you on the platform. He wants to see you. The driver climbed down from the cab and walked over to the platform. He came back in a few minutes looking very excited. Oh, said the fireman, what's happened? The engine from the other railway turned over while it was coming out of the yard. Nothing else can come in or out. They want us to take the train to London. I said we could, if Sir Topham Hatt agreed. They telephoned, and he said we could do it. How's that? Fine, said the fireman. We'll show them what Sir Topham Hatt's engines can do. Come on, said Gordon. Let's go. He quickly ran over the crossings and backed down onto the train. It was only a few minutes before the conductor waved his green flag and blew his whistle, but Gordon thought it was ages. Come on! 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 We're going to town! 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 Sang the coaches from behind, slowly at first, then faster and faster. Gordon soon realized that London was a long way away. Never mind, he said. I do like a good long run to stretch my wheels. But all the same, he was glad when London came in sight. Sir Topham Hatt entered his office the next morning. He looked at the letters on his desk. One had a London postmark. I wonder how Gordon's getting along, he thought. The station master knocked and came in. He looked excited and was waving a newspaper in hand. Excuse me, sir, have you seen the news? Not yet, why? Well, just look at this, sir. Sir Topham Hatt took the newspaper. Good gracious me, he cried. There's Gordon. Headlines, too. Famous engine arrives at London station. Police called to control crowds. Sir Topham Hatt read on, absorbed. Gordon returned from London the next day. Sir Topham Hatt spoke to his driver and fireman. I see you had a good welcome in London, he said. We certainly did, sir, replied the driver. We signed autographs until our arms ached, and Gordon had his photograph taken from so many directions at once, he didn't know which way to look. Good, smiled Sir Topham Hatt. I trust that he enjoyed himself. Didn't you, Gordon? No, sir, I didn't. Why ever not? London's all wrong, sir, said Gordon sadly. They've changed it. It isn't King's Cross anymore. It's St. Pancras. Double header. Sir Topham Hatt gave Gordon a rest when he came back from London. James shall do your work, he said kindly. James was delighted. He liked to show off his bright red paint and was determined to be as fast as Gordon. It also made him very conceited. You know, little Toby, he said one day, I'm an important engine now. Everybody knows it. They come in crowds to see me flash by. The heaviest train makes no difference. I'm as regular as clockwork. They all set their watches by me. Never late and always on time. That's me. Sure's you, replied Toby cheekily. Just then, Sir Topham Hatt arrived. Your parts are worn, Toby, so you must go to the works to be mended. Can I take Henrietta, sir? Asked Toby. No, what would the passengers do without her? Toby then stopped to see Percy at the water tower and explained to him the situation. Don't worry, Toby, said Percy. I'll take care of her for you until you get back. Soon Toby was out on the main line. His worn parts clanked as he trundled along. Toby was enjoying his journey. He was a little engine, and his tanks didn't hold much water, so he often had to stop for a drink. He had small wheels, too, and couldn't go fast. Never mind, he thought. The signalmen all know me. They'll give me plenty of time. Toby was still a bit concerned about Henrietta. Percy doesn't understand her like I do, he said. He felt thirsty and tired. He had come a long way. In the distance was a signal. Good, he thought. There's a station up ahead. I could have a nice long drink and a rest in a siding until James has passed. Toby's driver thought so too. They stopped by the water crane. The fireman jumped out and put the hose in Toby's tank. Toby was enjoying his drink when the signalman came up. He had never seen Toby before. Toby's driver tried to explain, but the new signalman wouldn't listen. There's no time for that, said the signalman. We must clear the line for James and the express. Right, said the driver. We'll wait in the siding. No good, said the signalman. It's for freight cars. You'll have to get more water at the next station. They've got plenty of room for you there. Poor Toby clinked sadly away. I must hurry, he panted. But hurrying used a lot of water, and his tanks were soon empty. They damped down his fire and struggled on, but he soon ran out of steam and stood marooned on the main line, far away from the next station. We must warn James, said the fireman. He walked back and put detonators on the line to warn James and his driver. Then he saw Percy and Henrietta and flagged them down with a red flag. Please, take me back to the station. It's an emergency. Henrietta hated leaving Toby. Never mind, said Percy. You're taking Toby's fireman back to the station to warn James. That's a big help. Henrietta felt much better. I'll tell that signalman something, said Toby's fireman grimly. James was fuming when Toby's fireman returned and explained what happened. I'm going to be late. My fault, said the signalman. I didn't understand about Toby. Now, James, said his driver, you'll have to push Toby. What? Me? Snorted James. Me? Push Toby and pull my train too? Yes, you. Shut! The driver, fireman, passengers, and conductor all said that he was a very bad engine. All right, I'll give it a shot, grumbled James. Still fuming dreadfully, he set off to find Toby. Once he saw him, he came up behind Toby and gave him a bump. Get on, you, he said crossly. James's driver made him push Toby all the way to the works. It serves you right for being such a crosspatch, he said. James had to work very hard, and by the time he reached the workstation, he felt exhausted. Some children ran across the platform. Coo, said a boy. The express is late. It's a double header, too. I think James couldn't pull it on his own, so Toby had to help him. Never mind, James, laughed Toby. Only joking. Ah, said James, and disappeared in a cloud of steam. Toby just smiled. Sir Topham Hatt's engines. One evening, Thomas brought his last train to the junction. He went for a drink. Percy was glad to see him. Are you on your way to the big station, Thomas? Yes, I am. Why? Because I'm going there too, and so is Toby. I think something is up. Where? Asked Toby, looking up into the sky. Not up there, silly, laughed Thomas. Down here. How can something be up when it's down? Asked Toby reasonably. Thomas was too excited to explain. Bust my buffers! Look over there, he said. 7 black-colored engines were coming along the line. Hello, Gente. Hello, Pug, whistled Percy. They're friends of mine, he explained, but I don't know the others. Ginty and Pug whistled cheerfully as they puffed through the station. What is all this about? Asked Thomas. Sir Topham Hatt has a plan, answered his driver, and he's going to tell it to us. Come on. So they followed to the big station at the end of the line, where all the engines had gone. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting there for him. The people of England, he said, read about us in books, but they do not think that we are real. Shame! Squeaked Percy. Silence! Called Sir Topham Hatt, glaring at the small green engine. Percy subsided. However, I have a letter to read from a little girl who is 5 years old. He held out a piece of paper and read as follows. Dear Thomas and all the engines, please can I meet you? My friends say they would like to meet you too. You could come to my house for tea, but my mommy says there aren't any railway tracks to my house. Can you come to the station instead? Thank you very much. The engines were very excited. It seems, continued Sir Topham Hatt, that there are many girls and boys who would like to meet you. Therefore, I am taking all my engines to England to show them that we are real. Hooray! Hooray! Whistled the engines. Sir Topham Hatt held his ears. Silence! He bellowed. We start the day after tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Meanwhile, these engines have kindly come from the other railway to take your place while we are away. So please show them your work and what to do tomorrow. The next day, as Annie and Clarabelle were going to England too, Thomas and Ginty practiced with some other coaches. Thomas grew more and more excited. Too excited for his own good. "I'm glad I'm a splendid engine," he puffed. "Sir Topham Hatt thinks I'm really useful. I had a race with a bus named Bertie once. I whooshed through a tunnel and stopped an inch from the buffers." Then Thomas made his mistake. "Just like this," he boasted. Crash! The buffers broke. No one was hurt, but Thomas's front was badly bent. He had charged into the buffers head on, and his driver had lost his footing once he surged forward, and only managed to slow Thomas down to ensure no further damage. They telephoned Sir Topham Hatt. "I'll send him some workmen," he said, "but if they can't mend Thomas in time, I'm afraid we'll have to leave for England without him." Poor Thomas. 8 o'clock next morning, the engines waited at the junction. Toby and Percy were each on a flatbed, and Duck had pushed them into place behind Edward. Henrietta stood on a siding. Sir Topham Hatt called her a curiosity. "I wouldn't dream of leaving you behind," he said. "I shall fit you up as my private coach." She felt very grand. Gordon, James, and Henry were out front, ready to lead off. They whistled impatiently. Sir Topham Hatt paced the platform. He looked at his watch. "I'll wait one more minute for Thomas, and then we have to go," he told the conductor. Just then, they heard a beep, 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 as Thomas hurried to the junction. "Oh, thank goodness you're still here," he panted. "I hope we're not late, as it's just after 8, twittered Annie and Clarabelle anxiously. "Thomas," said Sir Topham Hatt sternly, "I am most displeased with you. You nearly upset my arrangements." Thomas, quite abashed, arranged himself and his coaches behind Duck without saying a word. Sir Topham Hatt climbed into Henrietta. The conductor blew his whistle and waved his green flag. The engines whistled, "Look out, big city! Here we come!" And the cavalcade puffed off. Once in England, the engines stood side by side in a big, airy shed. Hundreds of people and children came to see them and climbed in and out of their cabs every day. The children were delighted to see their new friends. The engines liked it at first, but presently they were very bored and were glad when it was time to go. The people along their line put flags out and cheered them home. "We are glad to see you," they said. "Those others did their best, but they don't know our ways. Nothing anywhere can compare with Sir Topham Hatt's engines." When they returned home that night, Thomas whispered to Percy, "I'm glad the little girl wrote to us along with so many others. Isn't it amazing to see what happiness a letter and books can bring?" Percy agreed, and the two tank engines smiled.